So it seemed like you agree with the idea of like neopronouns, that we should respect them and all that stuff.
Um, yeah, I think that whatever well my position is that if you are not cool with a neo pronoun that someone gives you, call them by their name. And if it's weird, if they suck, then try to get away from them if you can. If you don't have
Okay,
to work with them,
so
something like that.
so what you're saying is that if somebody goes by neopronouns, I don't have to use them. I can instead use their name.
Because I know that there have been people saying like, what if my pronouns are the N word or something, right? Or like if like
Hmm.
a lot of people who
I'm gonna move my cam because everybody's been asking me to.
mute your
Just
cam.
let. I'm just gonna move it. Sorry. So you might need to keep up with my
Oh,
movement of my cam.
okay, I'll reset it.
Um.
Movement. It doesn't really matter.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it really does. There's just a billion people that keep adding me for some reason. Um. Okay. So I mean, how is that?
Like,
I'm
I was
just.
gonna say
Hmm.
that like also it's pronouns too.
Hmm.
Another thing that is I know very uh it has a lot of baggage to it. I don't think that we can gatekeep people's um expression, but I also don't think that people should have to use those pronouns towards someone if they um are uncomfortable, which I think a lot of people are. So, like I said, call them by their name or call the person by their name. Like use alternate words that aren't pronouns, right?
Um. Yeah. Uh. I guess sure, but like, what if people do? How are you saying that like I should respect somebody's neopronouns if I don't have to use their neopronouns? That's what I'm wondering.
And I think that you shouldn't disrespect them by not using the neopronoun.
So you think I
By like
should
if you
use people's neopronoun?
explicitly say like so say someone tells you something or I guess can you give me an example of like a neopronoun just like any.
Uh, turtle on turtle? No,
What? I
turtle.
don't know how that would be. How would that even be used?
I don't know. There's a
Sounds like a
dude.
Twitter bio.
There's a dude
Like,
who has Korean as his pronouns.
well, that doesn't sound like serious. Is it
It
a
seemed to be
Korean
kind of
person or
serious.
is it a white
It
person?
was the transracial Korean person.
Okay, well, fuck that person. It doesn't matter.
True, based. Um, yeah, it's like, but wait, if I gotta respect somebody's neopronouns, why couldn't I respect Korean as a neopronoun?
Because I think that considering that person like the for the same reason why if you find something personally offensive or like I guess like I said like if you feel uncomfortable or you feel like it could be offensive in general, then yeah, then you don't have to
What if I feel like
it.
equivocating somebody's gender identity as like a chair or a turtle is invalidating to trans people as a whole, like in regards to like trans women, trans men, and non-binary?
um Wait, I'm sorry. You
You
are
say,
saying
yeah,
that like someone's identity, like someone saying that that's how they identify is
yeah. I mean, that's isn't
yeah,
that what you just did with Korean? You said that like you don't have to respect their identity if you feel like their identity is like,
internally. Like I think that we don't have to like so say the troll kind of person or the uh the person that is spending however many hundreds of thousands of dollars to look Korean and seems like a piece of shit trust fund kid that you don't want to hang out around anyway, you can just of not use pronouns with them, call them by their name, and don't hang out with them. You know, like
Well,
I think that practically, um, like
so why couldn't I
okay,
make this
so
same argument for everybody that identifies as an inanimate object or an animal?
Because the way that someone identifies themselves is an inside thing turned out. So in general, like, so I guess it's kind of hard for me to transition into like the overall my overall position on gender. I feel like um I'm coming from a place of uh, the least amount of gatekeeping, the least amount of harm, like the most amount of self-expression, um, but also not fucking over other people's rights, right? Like and their autonomy. So I think that like when we think about like gender, what's a useful uh like okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I've had this conversation
Yeah,
like
so like
a handful of times.
just to get it back. Why is saying that like somebody who identifies as Korean being ridiculous? How come, we can say that about the person who's identifying as Korean with Korean being their pronouns, but I can't say that somebody who identifies as a turtle is being ridiculous.
Oh, I think if I didn't know who you were talking about, I think maybe I'm a little bit like having the context of it, I would just personally not be around them. I mean, in general, when it comes to gender, when it comes to self-identity, I think that a lot of times we think of it from an outside perspective where it's not gender is typically like a category, right? Um, and
So then, can I ask you a really pointed
yeah, sure,
question? All right. Do you think that
sure.
trans women are just as valid as trans turtles?
Um, Trans women as trans turtles. I don't think people identify as like like in a transracial, trans animal kind of way. Is that what you mean?
No, I mean, we can
I'm
use
a
the
little
deer
confused.
example that everybody references, or like the
Joe?
bunny example, like bun self. We can reference that, how people do that. Do you think that is equally as valid as being a trans woman?
I mean, those are also like uh trans people that are uh that are using them, right? Like
Yeah,
as
so is
far
the
as Joe
Korean dude.
goes,
So is the dude that went by Korean as his pronouns. He's a trans.
that's a transracial thing.
Yeah, but there's no rule that says pronouns can't be like a racial thing.
Yeah, and it's the same reason why I would say that calling I mean, it's not the same thing as, like, having your pronouns be, like, derogatory, like, specifically in words, but, if you personally find it offensive, then I think that you can just call them by their name. I think there's no reason if we're like I said, if someone tells you who they are, you can't like you don't really have the right to say no because you have no idea. Like you
Okay,
can't say that's not who you are, but you also don't have to be around
sure,
them or
sure. I
respect
don't.
them.
Yeah, I don't disagree
Yeah.
with what you're saying, but what I'm gonna say though is it seems like you're making special rules for the person who, the people who, identify as animals, but not granting that to the person who identifies as Korean. And so
But
I did.
I don't think that they identify as animals. I think that I mean, I can't speak for someone in that position. So, but
Okay, so
as
let's
far
do
as
it.
the
Let's do it this
myself
way. If
thing,
somebody,
I've heard that a few times before.
yeah.
So
So if
I'm
I
like
said I was trans turtle to you, would I be just as valid in your mind as a trans woman?
a well, trans turtle. You're saying that you are like a turtle
I
and
identify.
you identify as the animal, or that you feel like uh the the representation
The
and
representation,
aesthetic of a turtle
the representation and
is
aesthetic.
okay. Then I mean, I think that trans women can also like it's not it's not I'm it's not specifically exclusionary to each other. You know what I mean? Like as far as pronouns go,
No, I'm not talking about if it's exclusionary. What I'm trying to say is, do you think that they're equally valid? That you would treat both of them with similar levels of respect?
I mean, I don't see some I guess I that's not like okay, so like your gender identity can be fluid and complex. I mean, everyone's individual identity is different, right? But I wouldn't compare
You're
those
100.
things
Pepe self.
without any
Pepe
I
wins.
in general, even when it comes to things that are both bad, I don't compare them to each other because they're different things. So it's like it depends more on like what's the
Well, they're
situation?
both
What would
genders,
you do
right?
in a
So you can
situation?
compare two genders and their validity, no?
Wait, I'm sorry, what was the first
They're
thing you said?
they're both genders, right? So they're not entirely different. They're the same categorical thing. So why can't we compare them?
Well, their identities. Well, their gender.
What's the difference
Sorry,
between
I'm trying to think
identity and
of like.
gender?
I mean, it does. There is presently because of. Let me think of how to word this. I think that so like the way that I think about it is so it's important. It's more important um to support people who are actually oppressed, right? People aren't getting oppressed for being identifying as like trans turtle or
Right.
something like
So
that.
that's my point, but this leads you to the conclusion that you don't have any moral responsibility to respect people who identify as animals. Do you only have a moral
I don't think
responsibility?
that's what that is. Like, I mean, there's
Okay.
a difference between identifying as an animal and
Okay,
having your
identifying with
gender
an animal, is that what you're gonna make the distinction of? I think we
or
both know what I'm
this
talking
is just
about.
me. Well, this is a thing that I've seen kind of get mushed together. So I'm trying to, I guess, clarify it in my head as well in order to like talk to you about this because,
Okay, well,
you
I
know,
mean, I feel like I've made it pretty clear like three different times that I'm not trying to say that these people truly believe that they're like a four-legged green animal with a shell on its back. What they
and they
mean
have
is that
like they don't have any desires to change like
sure.
like they're not like transitioning into a turtle thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's not I think that you give people the same level of respect default across the board, but people who have like uh turtle gender related things don't need the concern or focus that trans women do or trans people in
So
general.
I so the you we you you can't make these two statements then
I
because
mean, why though? I
you
feel like
can't
you
you so
won't
you
really run into a lot of this
So
Like, I
whether or
feel
not
like
you
this
run
is
into it
kind of
isn't the
a
question. It's whether or not like we're logically consistent with it. So like whether or not I need to respect somebody who identifies as turtle gender equally with somebody who identifies as a trans woman. You say a part of that comes down
no,
to the
I'm sorry. Let me clarify. Um, I mean, like, by not misgendering them. Like, you don't
okay.
have to you can think
Well,
whatever you want of each individual person. I think a
so then
lot of people are
what
full of
was
shit.
what was the point when you were making when you said the lived oppression of like trans women or trans men or what have you in reference to like respect? What point were you trying to make then?
I'm saying that no matter how much it like say like any person, if they're an asshole, if they're causing a problem, then like you don't have to respect them beyond like, just if you're engaging with someone, don't misgender them even if they're an asshole. You don't have to understand. But yeah,
Would you say there's a greater emphasis for us to use the pronouns of, let's say, trans women over like trans turtles, like turtle gender
I
people?
mean, I would say that it's is it yeah, it's way more I mean, uh it's a real thing. The likelihood of someone um okay, so when it comes okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to follow it in a logically hypothetical situation, not versus like the likelihood of real life. Um trans turtles, trans turtle identities are not going to be specifically targeted. So I don't think that we have to worry about it. But if you happen to come across someone who does do that or have some kind of pronouns related to that, then it's just like, okay, sure. But when it comes to protection, seriousness, um, trans women, non-binary, trans men, like, etc. Um, people who actually are the target. Like,
Okay,
for
yeah,
instance, like with the kink at pride
yeah.
discourse.
I understand all of
Yeah.
this. So I don't disagree that there is a greater necessity to be respectful of trans women over like trans turtles due to the current cultural and societal context of like the treatment of trans people that are explicitly women, men, or non-binary. You agree with that statement?
Yeah. People
Okay.
who are specifically targeted. It's not it's it you
Okay.
can also be both.
Okay, so do you think that somebody who is not or choosing to invalidate or not use somebody's identity or pronouns as being trans turtle or being transphobic?
Like, give me like
Like I'm
what
using
can
their
you give me
name.
like a pronoun?
Sure,
Like
turt,
example.
turt, and then toll are their pronouns. Turt, toll.
So I'm just trying to imagine. Um like mm, I mean, I'm sorry, what was the original like respect it equally?
Okay,
Is that what you're
so
saying?
like would you call
I'm sorry,
somebody?
it's
So
been a
let's
long
say
day.
there's somebody who's turtle gender walks up to you and says that their pronouns are turtle, and I say no, I'm not going to use those pronouns. I'll just call you by your name, right? Do you think that's transphobic?
No, I think that it's bad. I think that you should just like you don't have to say that out loud. You can think that it's
Sure. So let's say that
weird
I think
and
let's say that
shitty.
I think it. I don't say out loud, "Hey, I don't respect it" or whatever. I just call them by their name, and I refuse to call them by tur or toll.
Um yeah, I mean if they are like gonna badger you about not specifically using pronouns, like someone cannot tell you how to structure
Right. So
structure
you
your sentence.
right. So
When you
you
are referring with pronouns, it's a substitute for their name, and it's usually like talking about the person to someone else,
So
right?
then, yeah, sure. So then you would agree that it's not transphobic to not call like a trans woman by she her then as well, right?
No.
Why not?
I mean, no, I mean it is transphobic
Yeah,
because they are actually oppressed, and if you
right.
refuse, then you are continuing the the target. They have a
Yeah,
specific
okay.
target on their
Sure.
back. Yeah.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so everything that you just agreed with is the anti-neo-pronoun take. Everything you agreed with.
No, it's not.
Wait, how isn't it?
It because I am so when it comes to gender, I think that we need to, if we are going to get rid of like the power dynamic between like the way we have it right now, which is basically focused on like man versus woman versus the umbrella of non-binary. So like no matter what, there's baggage between the binary. So there's like obviously like men aren't supposed to cry, women are,
Yeah.
they shouldn't have certain jobs, that kind of thing. I think that probably the in order to uh non-oppressively open that up and change our thinking of the way we look at gender, because right now like we need to the reason why we are focused on this and supporting trans people is because of the oppression. Like without oppression, gender doesn't really
Yeah, I don't
when it comes.
disagree. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
Turtle gender
So
has no oppression. Therefore, it's not relevant to me as a gender, and I don't have to respect it.
yeah, you don't have to respect it. You just shouldn't like explicitly misgender someone, because then it kind of like they should be the asshole. If they're being an asshole, they should be the asshole.
Wait, so who
Does that
cares?
make sense?
Wait, who cares? So if your argument is that it's rude and not transphobic, who cares?
I mean, in order if you said their name, and but versus like if someone specifically said what their pronouns are, then don't, and you think that they're either memeing or I don't know, whatever the circumstances that makes you like not really like or respect this person, then I would just avoid using pronouns in general. Like and also I would assume that I wouldn't be stuck with them.
Okay, what do you think the anti-neo-pronoun take is?
Anti-neo-pronoun, I think
Yeah,
it's
the
just
people who don't like them.
um it usually, I think, dismisses the underlying like self identity, like I guess the autonomy of people to be able to express themselves.
So,
And
like, do you think that you can reasonably identify with a turtle as you can, like, with a gender? Like, I should be
I
more clear, like,
honest
man, woman, or non-binary.
I mean, I don't know in a I don't know what that really means. Like, I don't know what that looks like. I can't like, the
Are you
only
against
person
transracialism?
example I have is Doe, like,
Sure. So,
and
like,
so
this
that's
is
like,
where I'll try and make the. Are you against transracialism?
I think that it's, like, transracial, like, the white
Yeah,
guy who
the
wants to
white.
be
Yeah,
Korean.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think that it's a fetishizing of it. I think that uh, like there's
Okay, so
definitely
what's the
something amiss with them.
so
They have
what's
some kind of baggage that they need to deal with.
so
Like
what's the
there are
difference? Right.
things that are specifically bad versus good. Like it's kind of like
So
you
why is it that me identifying as a trans turtle is more valid than me identifying, let's say, as trans white?
I think that trans white, I mean, that just sounds like wishful thinking of someone who is not white not wanting to have to deal with not
Okay, let's say
white.
I identify as trans Asian, whatever. Let's say trans
Like that
Chinese,
person
trans Chinese. Yeah, but yeah, or trans Korean.
seems
Yeah,
to
let's
be
just
a
stick with it.
fetish. Like it seems like a romanticizing at best, um,
Okay,
but
why
more
couldn't I?
like a
Okay,
fetish.
so you know that people make these same arguments against trans people, like trans women and shit like that. So, what is your
Yeah,
argument? So, why does it not apply to trans women, but it does apply to trans Koreans?
because there's no lived experience of relating to some kind of uh
Sure.
turtleness, I guess, or
Yeah.
chairness, where when people
Sure.
talk about chair gender,
Sure.
whatever, like it's a self-expression thing,
Sure.
but you can't like the experience and the culture of being of a certain ethnicity is not something that you can just take over.
Wait, why not? Because wait, what's the
Like
substantial
your
difference?
imagination of
Yeah,
it,
so I'm
you
just trying to
can,
hold on. I'm just
but
trying to
sorry.
relate this, right?
Mhm.
So how is it that I can have a greater connection with identifying as a turtle than I can with literally another human who's just Korean?
I mean, you can do whatever you want.
So that's what I'm asking you to justify, though. Is like,
What?
why can't I be trans Korean, but I can be trans turtle?
Well, the thing is that there's like I said, there's no turtle oppression. There's no turtle uh um
Yeah, I don't disagree with
there's
you.
no turtle experience. That's
Sure.
just like
Yeah.
your, you know, how you feel on the inside. You can't have a lived experience of what it is to be Chinese in America or in China or whatever. You know what I mean? Like you can cosplay in your head, but it's not actually real. So it's like you can feel connected to that, but that's just
Yeah, so
all
what
of
if I
it
so
because
what if I say
self-identity.
yeah, so what if I say I'm trans Korean, but I'm not actually Korean? I'm just I like I guess the what did you say um
Aesthetic,
yeah, the
the
aesthetic.
romantic,
Sure. The
the
romanticism like
or the
the same arguments that you would use that somebody would identify as a trans turtle, I use for identifying as Korean. What's the problem?
well, there like I said, there's no lived human experience of like turtleness, of be living in the world as and being treated lesser than for being a turtle.
Wait,
Like
but there
if
is for
you're
like women and men though. So then why would I allow to be transgender?
well, trans turtle, I don't think people actually think that they are trans animal. As far as I understand it, it's more like a part of your identity. Like when you think about gender as a category, like what is gender? Like what is it for?
Are you asking me is this a question?
Yeah, that's a real question. Like what
I
is
mean,
the purpose of gender?
gender seems to be a series of categories that we have arbitrarily assigned to society to primarily put the sexes into a specific role that we want them to fill inside of society.
Right, which is not a good thing, right?
Sure, yeah.
It's usually oppressive, right? So outside of the oppression part, is there any uh non-negative um use for
No,
gender outside of
I don't
oppression?
think there is. Therefore, I don't validate people outside of non-binary man and woman in reference to the bimodal distribution.
Well, that's the thing. What I'm saying is that um there are people who need to be protected, and then there are people who should just not be gate kept from living their lives,
Yeah,
right?
why couldn't I say that you can't you or you shouldn't gatekeep the Korean person, trans Korean?
I'm not. trying to gatekeep anyone from doing anything.
Well, I mean,
But
earlier
the
you just said
reality
that they're
is,
ridiculous, the person who did
oh,
that.
well, the thing is, like I said, there's no turtle experience. There is a human Asian experience.
Yeah, but there's
Like,
also a
you know,
human woman
right now,
experience as well. Why can I, as a man, let's say me, I try and say to you, I'm trans and I'm a woman now. There is a
yeah.
woman experience. How can I make that leap if I cannot make the leap from white person to black person or from uh, black person to Korean person?
Well, like we said, like when we categorize people, so it's like gender is something that we can't prove to anyone, and isn't really necessary, because like I don't think we disagree about there not being a non-negative use for gender cate- categories, right? So
Yeah,
like,
I mean, you're a race
yeah,
abolitionist
so,
as well, though, right?
huh?
You're a race abolitionist as well, correct? You would apply all of these same critiques to race. There isn't a good reason for race.
I mean, there isn't, but what I'm saying is that I don't know I don't know the steps it would take to dismantle race versus what I think when it comes to gender.
What
Like
arguments
I
to
don't,
dismantle gender that do you believe couldn't be used to dismantle race?
because there's specific inequalities for all different kinds of uh, uh, perceived racial groups, whether they are actually of those groups or not. You get treated differently, but it's way more complex. It varies, like, depending on, I mean, everything varies depending on where you live,
All
but
of those apply to
since it's more,
gender as
I
well.
mean, more like you said, when people right now with gender, people typically see things on the spectrum of the binary of man stuff and woman stuff, right? So like your life is different because of that. Um and I'm trying to remember what
Yeah,
I
but we
said.
don't.
Yeah.
And
So
we
that's
don't.
not equivalent to race because like, like being trans makes your life more dangerous, right?
Well, being
So
Korean could make my life more dangerous.
I mean, would anyone really know that that you thought you were Korean?
I mean, would anybody know that I'm a woman if I didn't change anything about the way that I look?
Yeah, no, they wouldn't.
So is that really an argument?
Why? What do you mean? I mean, like you would still be whatever your identity
Right. So
is,
I'm just
what your gender is.
I'm still
So
waiting on the argument that divorces race from gender.
because it's, I mean, it's like I said, I don't know how to begin like race abolition. I haven't there It's very complex and there has to be
Okay. Yeah,
like
I mean, can you
versus
synthesize as
like,
best as possible why I'm more valid as being trans turtle than I am trans Korean? How does that
I mean,
work?
oh, okay. I'm what I'm saying is that I don't think that it's useful to put things up against each other when they're two completely different things and there's no actual like utility for it because in a vacuum it doesn't matter. It like has nothing, like
So
it
these things
doesn't
have a lot of
impact anyone else. Like it is you're a person. If
yeah. So
you're
then
living your life, if
sure.
you think you're trans Korean, then that's your life.
Okay, so you're
Um
cool with transracialism then, because it's my life and I can choose to be trans Korean.
I think that you have like probably some uh underlying underlying mm, like some kind of racial baggage that you should probably talk to a therapist about
So couldn't I say the
and
same thing
clarify
about
with
somebody
them.
identifying as a turtle probably has some baggage as well?
I mean, I don't really. I don't think that people are identifying as turtles.
Okay, identifying with a turtle.
Yeah, no. Like I said, turtles don't have a lived experience as being uh, a person in the world that gets
Okay,
oppressed.
the reason why this argument doesn't work is because trans women and trans men have a lived experience. Women and men also, cis women and men also have a lived experience. So you can't
Mhm.
use the argument that you want to validate trans turtles because they don't have a lived experience, and you don't want to validate transracial people because there is a lived experience that they're betraying by saying that they're transracial. Because me's, you can't say I betray some kind of cultural stuff or foundation by becoming transracial, like trans Korean, because you would have to make the same argument for trans women and trans men because women and men have a lived experience as well. And I, as a man, haven't experienced what it is like to live as a woman. That's the reality of the case. However, if I was a trans woman, let's say I identify as a woman, like this afternoon, I'm sure you would be like, oh yeah, that's cool, poggies, right? So, but by your argumentation, I'd be betraying a lived experience. So, what I'm saying to you
Oh,
is give me a different argument because it applies to trans women and trans men.
it no, it doesn't because it is a human experience that has uh that we engage that has implications in society, right?
So does
That is
race.
oh, we're going sorry, I was thinking about the turtle
So the reason
thing.
why the turtle is an excess one is because whenever you give arguments against transracialism being a thing, I'm also applying it to the turtles and trans when it comes to gender. And the reason why is because I believe it is consistent that if you do not agree with transracialism, that you wouldn't agree with trans speciesism, whatever we would call it, right? And the reason why is for the same exact argument you gave for trans speciesism, which is there is no lived experience, or not there is no lived experience, but rather there's like me as a black person, right?
Mhm.
I'm able to do a lot of things, a tremendous amount of things right now. And I believe that all of these things that I can do, some of them are going to be labeled white, some of them are going to be labeled black, but I can do such a diverse group of things right now, whatever they may be, and activities, and not be bogged down so hard or nearly as hard as gender when it comes to my ability to do it. So, like, for instance, white people listen to hip hop and nobody bats an eyelash, you
I
know?
mean, but wait, one thing though, gender is not this doesn't have to do with biology. I mean, like, it's not the same thing as biology. It's not
Well, neither
like
is
you
race.
being born.
Race has
Well,
to,
I mean,
has an interlinking with biology, but race has primarily to do with some random configuration of arbitrary factors that we come to the conclusion of. It's the same basis as what we
because of
use for gender.
white supremacy, like,
Sure, yeah. And I mean,
and
we
that's
can make an
put
argument.
upon us.
Yeah, and we can make the
Like,
same argument for gender as well. That
yeah,
there's,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So what's the difference?
Like, well, what I said is we live in the context of the world right now. So we're treated uh like we go outside, other people treat us based on how they perceive us, right? Regardless of who we actually are.
Sure.
Um so that is that's why it's like when it comes to I'm sorry, I'm switching back and forth between the race and the turtle
Yeah, I don't care. Go
thing.
for it.
Um when it comes to like you will not have so gender identity isn't since it's not the same thing as like biological sex and when it comes to uh like race, the arbitrary sense of, you know, a- living with the history of white supremacy and, being where we are now, like we are impacted specifically. Uh, like regardless of who we actually are, where we're actually from, what our actual identity is, that's imposed upon us, right? So it's like no one's imposing uh like Asian stuff onto a white person, or like that's not like for instance, there was like a summer where there was some random dude that was going around and hitting Asian women in the face with a hammer. Like in
Jesus.
all the areas that I frequented in fucking like Brooklyn and Manhattan and shit for like work. Um, that's not a thing that would happen to, the person who wants to identify as Korean. Like that's a lived experience.
Yeah, but also that wouldn't happen to me as a trans woman if I never did anything to transition any of the way that I look. I would never get like I'd probably never get sexually assaulted by somebody that wants to sexually assault a woman, right? Because
Well,
I
that's
wouldn't.
perception,
Right. And what you just talked
right?
about was perception. Is that a white person saying that they're trans Korean wouldn't get hit in the head with a hammer or hit in the face with a hammer because they don't pass as Korean, so they won't have that lived experience. I can apply that same thing to trans people.
Right, but that's not like I said. So we get so like for instance, like people who are looking at random strangers and thinking in the context of like man or woman, and the stereotypes and roles that go along with it.
Yep.
There are some certain vulnerabilities that come with either one. So
Yep.
that's just, it doesn't have to do, it's the way that people look at us, but that doesn't, I don't wanna, like, repeat myself. I'm trying to, um
Well, okay, so let's put it this way. A lot of your argument hinges on the way that people perceive you. What about non-passing trans people?
what okay, what about them?
Well, how would they apply? Because a lot of your argument hinges on your lived experience of experiencing somebody that your lived experience as someone who passes as Korean. If you're a white dude and you say that you're Korean, you were talking about how you're not going to get hit in the face with a hammer, and how
I mean,
that
if
was a
you
point of
look Korean, then
no, no,
that's, like, a
no. Let's say
thing.
that you don't look Korean, and I'm just trying to make this analogous with non-passing trans people. If you're a non-passing, let's say, trans woman, what is that? How is that not the same as a non-passing trans Korean?
Are you, like, how are you perceived?
You're,
Are you,
you're
like,
okay. In one case, you're perceived as a man when you are a trans woman. In another case, you're perceived as white when you're trans Korean. What's the difference?
or I mean, like, is someone trying to pass? Are they out?
Uh,
Like,
I mean, we
if
could
you
take
told
either argument if
me.
you'd like. I mean,
Well, in general, like there are inherent dangers that are outside of um like the so in the context of where we are at today,
yeah.
um it's it's I'm trying to think. Mm, I guess like uh, I don't I guess I'm having a hard time because I don't really like compare, I don't try to compare things to each other. And there are a lot of like caveats where I'm trying to like imagine a world in which this is taking place. You know what I mean? Like a full world. Um
I mean, this is taking place right now. There are people that are identifying as transracial that do not pass as
right.
the race that they identify as. And there are
Right,
people
but
that are
the
identifying as like trans women or men that do not pass as the gender with which they identify as. This is currently happening.
well, we said, like it's separate, like the assigned sex at birth is not the same thing as like gender, right?
Right, and we
Right.
could make the same statement about race as well. When it comes to
Right.
like the
But if you
when it comes to like the one drop rule, somebody who's like 1/1 billionth% black is treated as black in comparison to like somebody that is like, um, let's say um like I don't know, like full black or whatever. They're both treated as black. Maybe not exactly the same because of people treating like maybe if they're darker skin or what have you. But
Mhm.
that's the way that it works. Race is not like an absolute biological thing. You're black if you're one
Right.
percent black
Right.
or what have
And
you.
that's different because I mean, like, there's a lot more complexity. There's a like, when it comes to race because there's so many factors to it. I honestly, like I said, I don't know how to even I don't know how to
I would
I
look
have no
into
ideas
the
about
sure. I would look
this
into
answer.
transracialism because I think comparing these things and comparing a lot of things are really important to understanding whether or not you're logically consistent. I think that you'll find that the arguments
But
that what
that's the thing. The logical consistency does not is not reliant on the individual things in a vacuum. They are like it depends on like the specific like what are we trying to do? Like they're different categories. They're different um like the what kind of like what is it being used for? I'm not going like I said, when it comes to someone wanting to be transracial, um, that's just I mean, that's just not a thing.